This is Matthew Cratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about the EU preparing to steal your stuff, as well as the UK, as well as the USA. But I want to start with the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He was not a big fan of nation states or German or Prussian nationalism. This is one of my favorite quotes from his book, Also sprach Zarathustra. This is from chapter 11 called The New Idol. And the new idol is the state, of course. This is what Nietzsche has to say. The government is the coldest of all cold monsters. Coldly it lieth, it tells a lie. And this lie creepeth from its mouth. I, the state, am the people. Everything the government says is a lie, and everything it has, it is stolen. I love that last phrase. And today's news story reminded me of it, that everything the government has, it is taken from someone else. We'll begin here with what's been called the most scary chart, unfunded pension entitlements in major European countries, most of them between 300 and 500% of GDP, which means that the real economy is too small to service this amount of debt. So what's one way of getting out of a nasty debt situation? The obvious way is lots of central bank money printing. You make good on the debt, but you end up massively devaluing the currency because the central banks, in this case the ECB, would print up a lot of money and a lot of new euros and buy the debt with it. So you make good on the debt, but you end up massively devaluing the currency, which causes a lot of inflation and societal crises. Every bondholder gets paid back at par, but their purchasing power gets decimated in the process. A secondary method is, of course, high taxes, which much of Europe already has, and other forms of theft and confiscation. What's the first step towards confiscation? First step is make a list of everything that everyone owns. And the rumblings that this is already happening with the EU asset registry. This is from Norbert. Register all your valuables in a central EU register, or registry, I think would be the correct translation, to help with financial transparency. Bank accounts, shares, cars, precious metals, Bitcoin, works of art, your tacky Rolex, register it all so we can fight money laundering. Coming soon, maybe. What could the EU asset registry look like? Expected to be a comprehensive database that records various assets owned by citizens. The aim is to increase transparency and better combat money laundering, not money laundering done by EU politicians, but other forms of money laundering and terrorist financing, unless the terrorist happens to be the US government, of course. The exact technical and bureaucratic details will be finalized in the coming months once the EU publishes the results of the feasibility studies, which assets are recorded in the register, wide range of assets, including real estate, bank accounts, securities, vehicles, possibly works of art, or precious metals. The exact list of assets to be recorded will depend on the results of the feasibility study and the subsequent legislative decisions. The aim is to create a comprehensive overview of citizens' assets. This is the story that it comes from, the original story. The idea behind the registry, assets with a value of more than 200,000 euros. So this does start at a high level, but this is how these government programs always start. So for example, in the US, the Bank Secrecy Act, the original cash transaction limit was $10,000, which in 1970 was a small fortune. Today, you can't even get a car for that amount. So what happens is, because of inflation, which is also caused by central banks and governments, these laws begin to expand until they hurt everyone. The same thing happened with the income tax in the US in 1913. It was just 1% plus a 6% surtax for the very, very rich. I think if you had $500,000 or more, which in 1913 was an absolute fortune. And then, as we know, because of inflation, everyone got pushed into higher and higher tax brackets over time. Now, this plan has been denied by an EU spokesman or spokeswoman. European Commission does not plan to create a central database on assets. My answer to that is never believe in any hypothesis too strongly until it has been officially denied by a government. At that point, you can be sure it's true. And of course, this is something that's true because they've been working on it since 2021. This is from the European Parliament, introduction of an EU-wide asset registry from August 30th, 2021. And we can see here that the value they were targeting was 400,000 euros down here. That's already moved down to 200,000. So we can see how the net will slowly be tightened until everyone in Europe will need to be on this registry. Now, this is just a study. Of course, they're going to say, we're just going to study how to create an asset registry, but we promise that we have zero plans to actually build one. We're just going to spend a lot of time and money studying it, but don't worry, it's not going to come. We really promise. If you're enjoying this video so far, I just ask you to help out the channel with the algorithm, click the subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, share this video with a friend or family member. Other ways to help out with the algorithm is you can leave a super thanks. Even just a couple dollars really helps because YouTube gets a percentage of this, and then they promote my channel and increase my audience and get this message out. You can also click the join button, which will allow you to join and get some badges and get some emojis and also get access to more videos every month. If that button doesn't work, you can go down here to the first pinned comment and you can click on that one. So what are some problems with an EU asset registry? Obviously, it's a huge violation of privacy. Shouldn't something called private property be at least somewhat private? You can almost understand registering real estate, but why should people have to register their other private possessions? This, in the process, will create a giant honeypot for hackers. This is what we see happens all the time. For example, the massive Equifax hack and the recent AT&T data hack in the US. Centralized databases of personal information always end up getting eventually hacked and leaked to the dark web. So this is really what this ends up hurting is just everyday citizens, and the terrorists and the money launderers find a way to do it anyway. And many of them are EU and American politicians to begin with. The other problem here, the EU really is dropping the mask and making it quite clear that it views its people as sheep to be shorn and harvested. These same rules, the same tightening of the noose will also apply obviously to Bitcoin, crypto, and cash. The EU's sixth anti-money laundering directive was passed in the spring. Managers of crypto assets such as banks or asset managers are also subject to stricter due diligence reporting obligation. For example, they're no longer allowed to offer crypto accounts for anonymous users. Also in the new legislative package, stricter monitoring regulations for people with assets of more than 50 million euros, which is obviously a lot of money. But then we have another one, an EU-wide upper limit of 10,000 euros for cash payments with a business background. This is going to be a very tight law if it's ever passed. In the same article, are there options to circumvent the possible asset registry? The registry will probably be designed in such a way that it will be difficult to circumvent it legally, especially within the EU. Even moving to Switzerland is unlikely to offer any security, as Switzerland is also planning a transparency-led registry and is stepping up the fight against money laundering. The automatic exchange of information between countries would also make it more difficult to hide assets. Anyone who still wants to avoid such a registry would have to leave Europe. What are the EU's reasons for introducing the asset registry besides inflation, debt loads, and confiscation? According to Wirtschaftswoche, the EU justifies the introduction of the asset registry primarily with the need to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. Of course, this won't apply to politicians like Christine Lagarde, who's already been convicted of a form of money laundering like payouts. This is a quote from a similar article from Christine Lagarde. Bitcoin is a highly speculative asset which has conducted some funny business and some interesting and totally reprehensible money laundering activity. Of course, her money laundering as IMF chief did not stop her from becoming head of the ECB. Lagarde goes on to note, there has to be regulation. This has to be applied and agreed upon at a global level, because if there is an escape, that escape will be used. And Lagarde is obviously referring to Bitcoin at this point. Europe's giant debt load means that it wants to try to close as many exits as possible, even Bitcoin, which is going to be very, very difficult to do. Try to close as many exits as possible before it hyperinflates and resorts to outright confiscation of assets. You can see all these quotes in this article below, as well as see how Lagarde is helping to flatten the curve and save our grandparents, which I'm very grateful for. Back in the UK, we also have bad news. UK's digital ID plan sparks freedom debate. The UK government has announced plans to introduce a government-backed digital ID system, which would allow citizens, rather than force citizens, is what the verb should be, allow citizens to use a single digital identity for various activities, including tax payments, alcohol purchases, and opening bank accounts. And you can be sure that this will be expanded to eventually include everything. The UK is one of the most highly surveilled countries in the world, probably second only to places like Israel. This is the Times article that talks about it. Government-backed digital IDs to let people open bank accounts. Well, thank goodness for digital IDs, because we'd never be able to open bank accounts if we didn't have that. People will be able, again, people will be forced to prove their identity for everything from paying tax to opening a bank account using a government-backed digital ID. Ministers have promised a trust mark for approved verification products will be created under a data bell that will make it easier for people to prove their identity as ministers seek alternatives to ID cards. This is the digital prison being built in front of you. The digital prison walls are being built every day. When is everyone going to wake up? Will Trump come out in favor of digital IDs too, given his high-tech backers? It wouldn't surprise me at all. All it would take is one big cyber attack or terrorist attack, real or false flag, to have every American sheeple begging for internet passports and a national digital ID. That's very similar to what's been happening in the EU and the UK as well. Last time Trump suspended our constitutional freedoms just because a lot of people caught a nasty cold that Chinese and American scientists created, and then Biden came around and was 10 times worse. As I said in this video about all aboard the Trump train, you can vote red or blue, you can vote Republican or Democrat, but in the US at this point in time, I believe the results will always be the same. It will mean endless wars and endless expansion of the surveillance state, as we're seeing in the EU and as we're seeing in the UK now. And I expect Trump to go along with this. If he doesn't, I'll be very pleasantly surprised. But given his vice president pick of J.D. Vance, who has extensive Silicon Valley surveillance connections, this is what I would expect to be rolled out in the U.S. as well. Not without a fight, but you can not count on the Republicans to fight against something like this either. Now, one nice thing about Bitcoin is that if you hold it in self-custody on a hardware wallet like the Cold Card, your Bitcoin cannot be confiscated without your permission, without you basically turning it over to someone. Bitcoin is also highly portable. You can't take your stocks or your house or your bonds or your bars of gold with you when you need to flee your oppressive government, but you can take your Bitcoin with you in an emergency. You just need to be able to memorize 12 words, your recovery seed, which is your Bitcoin backup. And we return to the quote from Nietzsche: "The government is the coldest of all cold monsters. Everything the government says is a lie, and everything it has stolen." And you can be sure in the coming decade that the EU, the UK, and the US will try to steal as much from its citizens as possible. What would Nietzsche think of our planet today, which has been completely overrun by cold monsters? It would probably drive him mad all over again. And if you know Latin, if you know what nihilism means, you'll get this joke: Nietzsche, what's the matter? Nothing. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.